Hey gang, how's it going? We have finally arrived at my top 10 films of 2016 vlog.
Get ready! Woo!
To quote one former great Cloud City Tabana gas miner administrator. Yeah. I'm of the opinion that you can't have enough Billy D in any YouTube video. Let's hit that shit again. Yeah. So I typically find compiling these vlogs to be frustratingly difficult, more so than my worst of the year vlogs, mostly because I'm a horrendous procrastinator. However, I was forced to delay it because Saskatoon, to be brutally honest, has a terribly limited number of screens for a city of our size. So of course that makes the process of screening and reviewing all of the big Oscar nomination hopefuls that get released in late December very difficult. That usually means that those big films don't get released and see the light of day in Saskatoon until probably mid to late January. Hence, the lateness of this vlog.
Sorry, sir. I'm doing my best.
One thing before we dive headfirst into my top 10 films of 2016. This is a personal list. No film makes the cut here to appease or impress anyone outside of myself. I loathe it when people complain that critics lack objectivity in compiling these lists. I mean, that's just so nonsensical. Film criticism, if anything, is not objective. It is the most subjective form of discourse. So the films here are ones that meant the most to me and spoke the most personally to me during the year that was. Okay?
Cool beans.
Cool beans.
One last little note. 3 films that I have not been able to screen yet: Manchester by Sea, Patriots' Day, and Jackie. Once I see them and they're worthy of including on a list such as this, I will include them in my yet-to-be-released Best Films of 2016 written blog that'll hit my site within the next few weeks.
Cool beans!
So, as far as the year that was, these films are the best around.
You're the best around. Nothing's gonna ever keep you down. You're the best around.
Yeah. All right, let's get this show started, shall we? All right, let's kick this off with my number 10 pick.
Do it!
You're coming.
Green Room was this mercilessly effective invasion thriller that starred the late Anton Yelchin as this leader of a metal band that ends up being brutally tortured and victimized by a bar of neo-Nazi scumbags, all led by Captain Picard himself, Patrick Stewart. I found this film to be unflinchingly raw. It was stomach-churningly violent and nightmarishly intense. Most importantly, it was a thriller that had a feral ferocity unlike any other film that I saw in 2016, so it deserved to be placed on this list.
Claim your birthright, Kubo. Give this story a happy ending.
Everyone usually talks about Disney and Pixar when debating the great animated films of our time, but Laika usually gets lost in the mix, and they're that Oregon-based stop-motion animation company responsible for films like Coraline and Paranorman. But their crowning achievement by far is easily Kubo and the Two Strings, and it was an endlessly beautiful fantasy with echoes of The Wizard of Oz and set in ancient Japan. This lush and gorgeous film, not only had superlative animation, but a heartfelt storytelling and a core message that had a relative meaning for young and old viewers alike. The film really got lost under the shadow of Disney and Pixar, but it was far and away last year's best animated film.
In here?
Richard!
What you doing in bed with that woman?
I'm his wife.
That's no good here.
You know, there were two films from writer-director Jeff Nichols that I could have included on this top 10 list, but I decided to go with his more low-key and effective film from the year that was, In Loving. It's a fact-based historical drama that's done with an abundant amount of masterful tact and restraint and filmmaking economy in telling a fact-based account of Mildred and Richard Loving, an interracially married couple in the 1950s that nearly went to prison for being married. The film is a stirring chronicle of their uphill battle to challenge societal laws, systemic racism and racial prejudices of the era, but also the Supreme Court. And with finely modulated performances, pitch perfect, less is more direction, and a historically compelling narrative, Loving may not be flashy Oscar bait, but that's precisely why I loved it.
Who is you, Sharon?
You know, there have been many films well before Barry Jenkins' Moonlight that have dealt with what it means to be an African-American male living in America, but I don't think very few have dealt with it as compellingly as this film did. Moonlight was this really eloquent and powerfully rendered drama that explored the multiple life stages of one man, from like childhood to teenage years and then finally into adulthood, and his attempts to define himself and understand his place in the world around him. And it was a rare film that sort of invited viewers in to observe its flawed characters with a real compassionate eye, and a lot of films could certainly learn from that approach.
It's not safe! Not with them!
Think on thy sins.
You know, any horror film can just randomly throw up violence and gore and jump scares on the screen in hopes of terrifying audience members. But I find myself always more frightened of the intangible unknown that's lurking behind the corners that's going to jump out and get you. That's what got me with The Witch. Recent horror films like It Follows and The Witch understood that notion perfectly. This was the directorial debut of New Hampshire-born, Brooklyn-based filmmaker Robert Eggers, and he wisely understood that the key to truly unnerving tension and real horror in a horror film is in establishing and maintaining a sensation of chronic dread. And this was a wonderful 17th century New England set horror film that was a masterpiece in fostering a lingering sensation of unease in its viewers. And that's why it belongs on this list.
The money is endless.
This tickling empire is way bigger than we ever imagined.
They have tickle cells all over the US. They're everywhere.
This has to be one of the strangest films that I have ever watched, but it also just happens to be one of 2016's most hypnotically watchable documentaries. It honed in on the world of competitive endurance tickling. And that's something that actually exists. I'm not making this up. But this film chronicled the exploits of a New Zealand journalist trying to uncover the origins and backers of such a weird online phenomenon, with positively shocking and unnerving results. Tickle does what great docs do. They introduce us to a subject matter that we know very little about, and then they audaciously subvert our very expectations of said subject matter. Months after seeing it, Tickled has stayed with me.
This is your chance to take you back.
On the ground!
Paying them back with their own money.
Well, if that ain't Texan, I don't know what is.
What stood out most for me about Hell or High Water when I screened it was how startlingly effective and authentically rendered it was as an evocation of desperate economic disparity. It was also one of the very rare crime dramas that allowed for a level of understanding and empathy for the criminals. Much like No Country for Old Men, Hell or High Water had the accoutrements of a Western with a contemporary slant and setting, and it did have a sobering thematic undercurrent of moral anguish and frustration. And David Mackenzie's crime drama flew in under the radars of a lot of people, especially during the past summer, but it triumphantly emerged as one of the year's most quietly powerful films.
Priority
already won. What do they want? Where are they from?
Denis Villeneuve could easily take claim to being one of the preeminent filmmakers of his generation and working today, with films like Sicario, Enemy, Prisoners under his belt, but his sci-fi masterpiece Arrival was just the icing on the cake as far as his career goes. And it emerged in 2016 as this wonderful anecdote to bloated blockbuster films that focus on eye candy first and ideas, characters, and stories a very distant second. And with a top-notch cast and impeccable visuals and a captivating narrative about first contact with an alien species that was all done through breaking down language barriers, which is really compelling. Arrival is sort of in the grand tradition of thinking man science fiction and deserves very high placement on my list.
City of stars, are you shining just for me?
Simplistically labeling La La Land as just a musical is kind of a disservice and a misnomer. Like, yes, it's a vibrantly alive and splendid musical, but it's so much more than that. It's a loving homage to classic and technicolor movie musicals of Hollywood's golden age. It's a loving homage to the movies themselves and to movie appreciation. It's a loving homage to jazz music and jazz history and the process that's employed in creating it. And it's also a loving homage to young love and romance pictures. But lastly, it's a loving homage to the enterprising determination of young and eager artistic minds to see their occupational goals through to successful fruition. Beyond that, La La Land is a bravura technical masterpiece. LA has never looked more sumptuously beautiful in the film, and it's perhaps the most awe-inspiringly creative musical that I've seen since Moulin Rouge. Okay, we finally have arrived at my #1 film of 2016. Ooh!
And here we go.
There can be only one.
Sing Street spoke to me on more profoundly personal levels than any other film from the past year, ostensibly because it's set in the era of my childhood and it enthusiastically tapped into its neon-hued pop culture. That and this coming-of-age musical comedy was one of boundless feel-good optimism that was made all the more engagingly toe-tapping because it's a celebration of music and music creation and one young man's artistic ingenuity. There's an undeniably potent message at the core of Sing Street that no matter how impoverished and bleak life appears, there's salvation to be had in the end in the arts and in artistic creation. And this film was so refreshingly lacking in any semblance of annoying cynicism or nihilism, and it reminded me last year more than any other film of the fatality of movies to serve as escapist engines to fill our hearts with feel-good happiness, and this was the ultimate feel-good film of 2016, and it is why I'm putting it as my #1 film of 2016.
Oh, sassy.
There's my top 10 films of 2016. Thank you ever so much for watching. Again, just to reiterate, I'm going to be posting a larger best of the year written blog on my website in the weeks to come. It's going to be a top 25, so it'll expand upon this vlog for your reading pleasure.
I like it!
Also, if you're interested in my worst films of 2016 vlog, I did post a video on YouTube a few weeks back. I'll also put a link to that video in the description below. If you could like this video, I'd really appreciate it. If you could subscribe to my channel, give me some channel love, that would mean the world to me. Yeah. That would actually make you the best around.
You're the best around. Nothing's gonna ever keep you down.
Take care, everybody, and I'll see you at the movies.